There comes a moment, quiet but seismic, when something inside you simply stops responding, not with anger, not with tears, but with silence. A silence so profound that it echoes louder than any confrontation ever could. This is not the silence of defeat, it's the silence of awakening. And for a narcissist, that silence is unbearable. Because up until now, they've danced in the rhythm of your reactions. Every time they guilt-tripped you, gaslit you, or twisted your reality, they waited for your energy to feed them. But now, you've gone still, not numb, aware. And that awareness is a direct threat to their power. You see, a narcissist's control depends on your participation, on your explaining, justifying, defending, hoping. The moment you no longer play the game collapses. And it terrifies them. Because you're not just rejecting their words, you're refusing their version of reality. That's when their mask starts to crack. You stop replying to the late-night texts. You stop answering the calls soaked in guilt. You stop showing up emotionally to someone who only showed up for themselves. And suddenly, you're not the desperate one anymore. You've become something else entirely, unpredictable, untouchable. And that's what they fear most, losing access to the person they never truly valued, but always needed. When you detach, when you reclaim your voice by no longer explaining it, their sense of control disintegrates. They'll try to provoke you, tempt you, test you. But now you see it for what it is, a cycle, not a bond. An illusion, not love. Because what you're walking away from was never connection. It was dependence wrapped in charisma. And you finally, painfully, beautifully, see it. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is that moment. The moment when what once controlled you now reveals itself. And you don't beg it to stay, you watch it leave. That's the true break, not when the narcissist lets go of you, but when you stop needing them to. To understand why your silence cuts so deep, you have to understand what they were feeding on all along. Not your love, not your support, not even your presence. What they needed was your energy, your reactions, your emotional currency. This is narcissistic supply, the lifeblood of a narcissist's false self. They crave admiration, attention, validation, control. Not because it fills them, but because it distracts them from the emptiness they refuse to face. It's not affection they want, it's fuel. And you, unknowingly, were their main source. When you laughed at their jokes, defended them in public, cried during their silent savory moment, was a deposit into their fragile self-worth. But here's the paradox. No matter how much you gave, it was never enough. Because narcissistic supply is like pouring water into a cracked vessel. The attention leaks, the validation vanishes. And so, they return always needing more, always demanding more, not because they see you, but because they need something from you, something they can't create within themselves. Carl Jung's work speaks directly to this void. He believed that everything we repress becomes the shadow, the hidden, denied parts of ourselves we cannot accept. The narcissist's shadow is vast. Their vulnerability, their fear of abandonment, their shame, their inadequacy. Instead of confronting those things, they build a false identity, a grandiose mask. But masks require constant reinforcement. And that's where you came in. You weren't just a partner or friend, you were a mirror. A mirror they used not to see themselves, but to avoid themselves. But the moment you stopped reflecting back what they wanted to see, panic set in. They no longer had control over the narrative, and without that control, their identity, so carefully constructed, starts to crumble. This is why your freedom feels like a betrayal to them. Because it's not just about losing you, it's about losing the lie they built through you. When a narcissist loses their supply, they lose access to the illusion of wholeness. And instead of facing their shadow, they'll do anything to avoid it. Blame, attack, disappear. But don't be fooled. It's not love, it's addiction. And now that you're no longer feeding it, they're starving in a darkness they created themselves. There's a moment after you break free when the silence settles sand, not just for you. The narcissist feels it too, but not the same way. For them, silence isn't peace, it's panic. Because without your energy, their illusion starts to fall apart. The version of themselves they built through your admiration, your attention, your compliance suddenly, it's gone. And what's left behind is something they can't bear to look at, themselves, unmasked. You were never just someone in their life. You were a tool, a canvas, a reflection they needed to maintain their fragile sense of worth. When you stop reacting, you take that mirror away. And for someone who never cultivated an inner life, only a curated persona, that loss feels like death. This isn't just heartbreak or disappointment, it's a collapse of identity. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we present to the world, and warned that if we identify too deeply with it, we risk becoming hollow. The narcissist doesn't just wear the mask, they believe they are the mask. And when the mask is no longer reinforced by your responses, they begin to unravel. Confusion sets in, then fear, then chaos. They may seem calm on the surface, even indifferent. But internally, they're in free fall. This is the withdrawal shock. Like a junkie denied their fix, they don't just miss you, they miss the control, the validation, the identity you unknowingly upheld. Your silence forces them to confront a void they've spent their entire lives avoiding. And instead of sitting with it, instead of reflecting or healing, they scramble for attention, for revenge, for anything that might patch the hole. But nothing works like you did. No one reflects them back the way you did. That's when the crisis deepens. That's when the desperation begins. And that's when the mask begins to crack, not because you broke it, but because you stopped holding it in place. When a narcissist loses control over you, they don't mourn. They retaliate. But not always with fists or fury. Sometimes the rage is loud, explosive, cruel, undeniable. Other times it's silent, strategic, icy, wrapped in a chilling indifference. Both are weapons, both are masks. Because behind the rage is not strength, it's fragility, it's injury. And in the world of the narcissist, injury is unacceptable. This rage isn't about justice, it's about punishment. It's the narcissist's final attempt to reassert dominance when the script no longer works. To them, your departure isn't just rejection, it's humiliation. And that humiliation awakens something primal. Carl Jung would call it the disowned self, the parts of ourselves we exile because we fear they make us unlovable. For the narcissist, that disowned self is filled with shame, envy, inadequacy, and instead of facing it, they project it onto you. They accuse you of being cold, selfish, manipulative. Everything they cannot admit in themselves they place at your feet, because to own their flaws would be to shatter the very illusion that sustains them. So they rajeunent because you hurt them, but because you exposed them, not because you lied, but because you stopped believing theirs. The narcissist's rage is a mirror. It reflects how deep their dependency truly ran. You were never meant to leave, you were meant to orbit, to comply, to forgive endlessly. And when you didn't, when you dared to reclaim your space, they saw that as war. Their identity depends on domination, and without it they feel erased. So they fight not for love, not for connection, but for control. Some rage through silence, vanishing without closure to punish you with confusion. Others rage with words, slander, or calculated cruelty. But in all forms it's the same cry. How dare you stop serving my illusion? But this time you see it. This time you don't take the bait. Because now you understand. Their anger isn't your burden, it's their shadow screaming in the dark. And you? You finally stepped into the light. Just when you start to breathe freely, when your silence has settled and your peace begins to take root, comes the unexpected message, a late-night text, a familiar voice on the line, a subtle like on an old photo. It's not coincidence, it's strategy. This is the narcissist's first real move after the mask begins to slip. It's called hoovering, named after the vacuum, because its goal is simple, to suck you right back in. But this isn't the version of them that raged or vanished. This is the charming version, the sentimental one. Suddenly, They remember all your anniversaries. They speak of dreams you once shared. They say the words you waited months or years to hear. I miss you. You were right. Let's start over. But here's what you must remember. It's not love. It's leverage. What makes hoovering so disorienting is how believable it feels. After so much emotional starvation, even crumbs taste like a feast. The narcissist knows this. They're not just guessing, they're calculating. They sense the precise moment your guard might lower, and they strike with just enough vulnerability to make you doubt your truth, just enough softness to make you forget the chaos. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." Hoovering is exactly that. Instead of confronting the pain of their broken self-image, they reach for what once worked, you. Because if they can get you back even for a moment, means their illusion still has power. It means the narrative hasn't slipped completely through their fingers. But you've changed. You see through the timing, the performance, the recycled lines. You know that real change doesn't arrive wrapped in nostalgia or midnight regrets. It arrives in silence, in effort, in sustained transformation, not in a single message sent out of panic. So when they knock again, sounding like who they used to pretend to be, ask yourself, is this apology a doorwayer, a trap? Because this time, the danger isn't what they'll do if you stay. It's what you'll lose if you go back. When charm fails and silence doesn't scare you, the narcissist plays their final public card, character assassination. This is the smear campaign, slow, venomous unraveling of your reputation, designed to turn your truth into a lie and your strength into shame. Because if they can't control how you feel about yourself, they'll try to control how others feel about you. It starts quietly. A comment here, a story there. Suddenly, mutual friends are distant. Whispers replace warmth, and you begin to wonder, what are they saying about me? But deep down, you already know. They're not just rewriting the narrative, they're erasing the part where you woke up, the part where you said no. Carl Jung taught that what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. For the narcissist, your resistance to their manipulation becomes intolerable, and so they resist you. Not with silence this time, but with sabotage. Their goal isn't just to hurt you, it's to isolate you, to strip you of allies, to plant seeds of doubt so that when you speak your truth, you sound unhinged, overdramatic, bitter, just like they said you'd be. And here's the cruelty. Much of what they say is built on partial truths, twisted and repurposed to serve their version of the story. They'll say you abandoned them but omit the months they went silent. They'll say you were unstable but leave out the years of emotional gaslighting that led you there. It's not a story, it's a weapon, one wielded by someone who cannot accept that they lost control. What's most dangerous about the smear campaign isn't the damage to your reputation, it's the slow erosion of your reality, the temptation to defend yourself, to explain, to beg others to see what you see. But you must resist, because every time you engage, you step back into their theater. You become an actor in a script you didn't write. Remember this. You don't need to prove your truth to people who believe the lie without asking questions. Let your peace be the loudest statement. Because in a world where the narcissist spins fiction, your calm, your healing, your continued rise, that's the one story they'll never be able to rewrite. Silence can be sacred, but in the hands of a narcissist, it becomes a weapon. After the hoovering fails, after the smear campaign starts to crack, they may retreat into what seems like absence. But make no mistake, this is not distance born of reflection or remorse. It is strategy, precision. The silent treatment is not silence for healing, it's silence for punishment. This is not a person stepping back to find themselves. This is someone removing their presence to create a vacuum, one they hope you'll panic to fill. It's the emotional equivalent of holding oxygen hostage. They don't call, they don't respond, they vanish, but not completely. There are breadcrumbs. A story viewed, a mutual friend contacted, a message left unread. Just enough to remind you they exist, just enough to keep you spiraling. Carl Jung said, Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. And the narcissist knows that. That's why they stop communicating, not because they're too wounded, but because they want you to feel powerless. They want you to question your value, your voice, your very reality. What did I do wrong? Should I have said it differently? Why won't they just respond? But here's the truth. Their silence isn't absence. It's control disguised as distance. And what they're hoping is that your anxiety will grow louder than your clarity. That you'll mistake their withdrawal for emotional depth, when in fact it's emotional manipulation. They want your mind to race, your guilt to build, your boundaries to soften. What they fear is your stillness, your indifference, your refusal to chase, because in that refusal they lose their grip. The silence they use to destabilize you becomes a mirror reflecting their own emptiness. And that's why, despite their calculated distance, they're always watching, waiting to see if you'll break. But this time, you don't. You let the silence speak, and what it says is simple. You no longer control this space. When the narcissist's charm, rage, and silence fail to bring you back, they activate one of their most insidious tactics, playing the victim. Suddenly, the person who once gaslit, manipulated, and discarded you transforms into the wounded one, the misunderstood, the betrayed, and you're now the villain in a story you didn't write. This reversal isn't clumsy, it's deliberate. Because when they can no longer convince you, they try to convince everyone else. But even more than that, they try to convince themselves. Carl Jung taught that the shadow, the parts of us we refuse to acknowledge, doesn't disappear, it projects. And in this act of projection, the narcissist takes everything dark and unacknowledged within themselves and pins it to your back. Were they cold? Now you're heartless. Did they lie? Now you're untrustworthy. Did they manipulate? Now you're controlling. It's not just denial, it's transference of guilt, and it's vicious. Because it allows them to maintain their internal illusion of righteousness. It lets them keep the mask firmly in place, even as everything around them begins to unravel. And here's the cruelest twist. Their performance is often convincing. They may cry, apologize to others, speak of their heartbreak with trembling voices and carefully chosen words. Not because they feel it, but because they know others will. They use sympathy as a shield, weaponizing empathy to protect their ego. And while you're out there trying to heal, they're out there trying to rewrite. But beneath the performance, the shadow still festers. Because they haven't done the work. They haven't looked within. They haven't asked themselves the terrifying question, what part of me created this? And until they do, they will keep projecting, keep blaming, keep needing someone else to carry the pain they refuse to hold. You'll feel the injustice. You'll feel the temptation to clear your name, but you'll also feel something else, something stronger, the knowing, the deep, grounded awareness that truth doesn't need to shout, that your healing is not up for debate because you've seen what they're still hiding from, their own reflection. And that's the real reason they made you the villain. You saw what they couldn't bear to face in themselves. Once you begin to heal, truly health, narcissist senses it. Not just your silence, but your strength. The way your energy no longer bends around them. The way your eyes no longer carry the same longing. You're no longer feeding the illusion. You're building a life without them in it. And that, to a narcissist, is unacceptable, because they don't just want attention. They want the version of you that needed them. So what do? They evolve in the surface. Suddenly, they mirror your growth. They speak your language. They've read the books you mentioned. They're doing the work. Meditation, therapy, emotional accountability, it's all there now. But look closely, listen carefully. What you'll see isn't evolution, it's adaptation. Not to their truth, but to yours. Carl Jung once warned us that the greatest danger lies not in the darkness we face, but in the masks we mistake for light. And that's exactly what this phase is, a mask made of your reflection. They aren't changing. They're copying, echoing your strength in the hope you'll mistake it for shared transformation. But the core remains untouched, the patterns unbroken, the accountability shallow. Because real change isn't about imitation, it's about integration. You've climbed from the pit they left you in. You've cried, questioned, crumbled, and then stood taller. And now they show up not because they've done the same, but because they miss the control they once had. It's not your growth they admire. It's the power they believe it can give them if they align with it. But you know now. Real healing doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't beg for a second chance. It doesn't arrive with a script. If someone returns mimicking your journey but avoiding their own, they're not meeting you at your level, they're trying to wear it like a costume. And that's when you trust the new voice inside you. The one that doesn't just hear the words, they feel the truth. Because growth, when it's real, doesn't need to convince. It resonates. Anything else is just a performance. By now, they know you won't fall for the rage, the silence, the mimicry. So they try one last move on that sounds innocent, even mature. I just need closure. Or, can we talk just once? But this isn't about peace. It's about permission. Permission to re-enter your space, to poke holes in your healing, to reopen the door you finally had the strength to close. This final move is coded in sincerity. They may seem calm, thoughtful, reflective. They'll speak of regrets, of wounds they've unpacked, of understanding you like never before. But listen closely. The energy isn't grounded in peace, it's charged with urgency, with desperation. Because what they're really asking is, can I shake your clarity just enough to pull you back into chaos? Carl Jung taught that unresolved emotions don't die, they're buried alive and resurface in uglier forms. That's what this final act is, a resurrection of unfinished manipulation dressed as reconciliation. They don't want closure, they want access. They want the final word. They want to plant just enough doubt that you reopen the chapter they were never willing to finish themselves. They might say, I just want to explain. But explanation isn't the goal, it's the hook. Because they know you're someone who values truth, depth, understanding, and they weaponize that. They use your emotional integrity to tempt you into a room you've already burned down. And if you enter, even with boundaries, you'll feel it, the shift. The way the conversation subtly turns, how your voice gets softer, how old feelings stir, how guilt creeps back in. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. Because you once loved them, and they're counting on that. But you're not the same person. You've learned that real closure doesn't come from someone else's mouth. It comes from your own decision to let go, to walk away without needing one last sentence to make it make sense. This final plea for closure is not an ending, it's a trap door. And once you see it, you don't open it, you walk past it. Not out of coldness, out of clarity. Because when someone tries to disguise emotional blackmail as healing, your silence becomes your greatest act of self-love. There was a time when your softness made you a source. Your empathy, your flexibility, your willingness to forgive it all made you easy to manipulate. But that version of you is gone now. In its place stands someone firmer, quieter, less available. Someone who no longer needs validation to feel whole. And to a narcissist, that's not just unsettling, it's threatening. You've become something they can't understand, a person who no longer seeks their approval. A person with boundaries, not walls, but firm edges that say, this is where I end and you begin. Those boundaries, once invisible, now stand tall. And every time you uphold one, you hold up a mirror. Not to their greatness, but to their limitations. Your growth exposes their stagnation. Your calm highlights their chaos. Your healing reflects the work they've refused to do, and rather than inspiring them, it infuriates them. Because to evolve would mean facing the parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime denying. And you've done it. You've walked through the fire they pretend doesn't exist. Carl Jung spoke often of the shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche we try to hide from. Your healing has made your shadow conscious. You've integrated, owned, transformed. But theirs? It still runs their life from the dark. And when they see you moving forward, living without them, no longer orbiting their emotional weather, they feel exposed. Not because you've said anything, but because your very existence says everything they don't want to hear. You are a living contradiction to the story they tell themselves. That they were right, that they were powerful, that they were needed. Now, your independence is an indictment. Your peace, a form of resistance. And to someone who survives on control, your freedom is the ultimate rejection. So don't be surprised if they lash out in new ways, if they suddenly become cold, dismissive, mocking, because when they can't reach you, they try to diminish you. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've done something they won't, you healed. When all their tactics fail, the rage, the silence, the charm, the guilt, there's one last move left: erasure. Not forgiveness, not closure, but a total rewriting of the story, with you edited out as if you never mattered. This is the narcissist's final defense against the truth: to pretend you never existed, or worse, that you were irrelevant. They won't rage anymore. They'll go quiet, cold. Not the calculated silent treatment this time, but a deeper kind of absence, an emotional void. They'll speak of you in past tense, if at all. And if your name comes up, it will be laced with indifference or contempt, as if your history was insignificant, as if the moments you bled for were nothing more than a footnote in their life. But this isn't strength, it's self-protection, because to acknowledge your worth would mean acknowledging what they lost, and that would require a reckoning they're not ready for. So instead, they destroy the evidence, they erase the memories, they create a new narrative own where they were the wounded, the wise, the one who moved on. And you were unstable, difficult, replaceable. This is not about you. It's about preserving their illusion. Carl Jung warned that the ego will go to great lengths to avoid its own death, and the narcissist ego is fragile beyond words. Your presence was once their mirror. Your departure shattered it. So now, in the wreckage, they build a new reflection, one where you never mattered, one where they never needed you, one where they never broke. But you know the truth. You lived it. You remember the nights, the confusion, the highs laced with fear, and you also remember the moment you stopped accepting the bare minimum as love. That is your closure. That is your liberation. So when they pretend you didn't exist, let them. When they act indifferent, let them. Because true healing doesn't come from being remembered by the wrong person. It comes from remembering yourself. Their final move may be erasure, but yours is resurrection, and that is something they can never touch. There's a road that every human is called to walk, at least once in their life, not paved with accolades or outward success, but lined with self-confrontation, disillusionment, and rebirth. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole by integrating the conscious with the unconscious, the light with the shadow. It's the hardest path a person can take, and it's the one the narcissist refuses to. To individuate means to see yourself not as a mask, not as a role, but as a fractured, evolving being. It means owning your wounds, your projections, your fears. It demands standing naked in front of your own contradictions and choosing truth over image. But for the narcissist, the image is everything. Their survival depends on it. To even glimpse the shadow beneath would feel like death. So instead of healing, they double down. Instead of introspection, they choose projection. And rather than integrate the broken parts of themselves, they assign those parts to you. They will never ask, "Why do I hurt people I say I love?" They'll ask, "Why are you so sensitive?" They won't wonder, "Why do I fear being alone?" They'll accuse you of being cold, detached, disloyal. Every moment that could lead inward is rerouted outward: blame instead of reflection, ego instead of soul. And here's what they don't see. You were offered the same choice, but you took the harder route. You descended into yourself, faced your pain, sat in the stillness. You began the work not to become someone new, but to remember who you were before the survival masks were built. That's the difference. You chose to heal. They chose to perform. And now, your quiet confidence threatens the illusion they cling to. Individuation isn't about perfection. It's about integration. You didn't run from your shadow, you welcomed it. And in doing so, you became something they will never fully understand, to whole. Not invulnerable, just no longer breakable in the same places. While they remain stuck in a loop of repetition, you walk forward wounded, wiser, and free. Freedom isn't just leaving, it's staying gone. It's resisting the pull not just to return to them, but to the version of yourself who tolerated what you now see so clearly. Real freedom isn't dramatic. It's disciplined, quiet, rooted in a kind of clarity you fought hard to earn. And staying free means guarding it like your life depends on it, because in many ways, it does. The most dangerous part of surviving a narcissist isn't the relationship, it's what comes after. The moments when loneliness whispers louder than logic, when nostalgia distorts memory, when the old patterns try to find new ways back in, this is where spiritual and psychological vigilance becomes essential. Start with awareness. Recognize the signs before they fully take shape. Love bombing dressed as reconciliation, emotional bait disguised as vulnerability. Let's be friends, cloaked as control. These aren't random, they're rehearsed, and if you're not grounded, they'll catch you off balance. So return to your anchors, your values, your breath, your truth. Practice emotional neutrality. Not everything needs a response. Not every accusation needs defense. Not every message needs opening. The narcissist feeds on reaction. And the greatest resistance is refusing to engage. Let your peace be the answer they'll never understand. Carl Jung believed that wholeness wasn't the absence of conflict but the integration of it. You now carry the wisdom of the storm, the memory of what it cost you to silence that chaos. Keep that memory close, not to suffer, but to protect, to remember why you said no, why you walked away, why you must not go back. Build rituals around your recovery: journaling, therapy, movement, art, nature. These are not luxuries, they are lifelines. Because staying free isn't passive, it's intentional. You must nourish the self that once starved for approval. You must honor the version of you that nearly disappeared. And above all, remember this: the narcissist was not your teacher, the healing was. You are not defined by who hurt you, you are defined by how you chose to rise. So when they try to circle back, remind yourself, closure was never theirs to give, it was yours to claim, and you already did. You were never just a person in their life. You were a mirror that reflected back the truth they didn't want to see. Your presence disrupted their fantasy. It made them uncomfortable, not because you were wrong, but because you were real. And for someone who survives through illusion, reality is the ultimate threat. You brought depth to a world they wanted to keep shallow. You brought questions to a script they never wanted to rewrite. You didn't just challenge their behavior, you challenged their identity. And rather than evolve, they resisted. Rather than lean into the discomfort and grow, they retreated, blamed, destroyed, because facing you would have meant facing themselves. And they weren't ready for that kind of honesty. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." That's what you became: the opportunity to go inward, to confront their emptiness, to begin the work. But they refused. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were too much for a mask to hold. So they chose the easier path, denial. And you? You chose the harder one, awakening. You walked away not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself. You didn't slam the door to hurt them, you closed it to save yourself. And that's what they'll never admit. That losing you wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the moment the mirror cracked. It was the loss of their reflection, the one they thought they controlled. And now, no matter how many stories they spin, no matter how many masks they wear, the truth lingers. You were the lesson they refused to learn. But that lesson wasn't wasted, because it wasn't for them, it was for you. Every tear, every silence, every time you questioned your worth, you here, not broken, not bitter, but aware. Aware of your power, aware of your boundaries, aware of what love is and what it is not. Your awakening wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was steady, sacred, It happened the moment you stopped needing to be understood and started honoring your own knowing. That was the moment you stopped surviving theme and started becoming you. And that is the one thing they'll never be able to erase. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.